Hello, this Mr. Code video counting down my top 10 favorite British films was sponsored by Anthony over on Patreon. If you want to throw your support and possibly suggest some video ideas of your own, guaranteeing that spot on the schedule, just visit my Patreon. Link is in the description. And now, on with the show. One of the most prosperous film industries is the United Kingdom's. For many people, the films they produce represent their peak at Great Britain. Whether through their sharp-witted comedies or elegant period pieces, many a wonderful film has come out of the British Isles. I'm going to count down my favorite British films, the ones that represent the best of what UK cinema has to offer. Limiting it to 10 was tricky, not only because of the many fantastic films produced there, but also because of how international co-productions have slightly complicated what a British film is. That's why I also chose films that are distinctly British with a primarily British crew. So here is my list, starting with Oh Lucky Man. Of Lindsay Anson's films, this might be my favorite, and probably one of my favorite films nobody ever seems to talk about. Inspired by Malcolm McDowell's time as a coffee salesman, this is an absurd, surreal, and funny adventure that even at 3 hours moves along at an impressive pace. The various scenarios McDowell finds himself in allow Anderson to comment on various forms of society. We find ourselves, like McDowell, being lunged from set piece to set piece, and attempting to comprehend what is surrounding him. Throw in a lively soundtrack by Alan Price and a charming supporting turn from Helen Mirren, and this becomes a fun watch. It's a shame this film is not talked about more, because it would fit right in with the French surrealist masterpieces commonplace in the 1970s. If you're only familiar with Malcolm McDowell from his performances in A Clockwork Orange and Caligula, it's worth seeking out his collaborations with Lindsay Anderson. A Hard Day's Night. The idea of doing a movie about the Beatles at the height of their popularity in the 60s might have seemed like a quick way to make some money. However, Richard Lester went beyond that and created an hilarious comedy that both celebrated the Beatles and lampooned their newfound celebrity. The four of them all deliver note-perfect comedic timing, and it's easy to see why young people were so charmed by these blokes from Liverpool. The musical numbers are, of course, incredible, with Lester really changing the editing game. One can definitely see the influence A Hard Day's Night would later have on music videos. The plot crafted for this film is simple, but manages to effectively mix well-acted comedic scenes with documentary footage of the Beatles in concert for their screaming fans. If you're a fan of the Beatles, you have probably already seen A Hard Day's Night, and are instead waiting patiently for Let It Be to get a home video release. For everyone else, it's worth visiting this time capsule of Beatlemania in 1964. Brief Encounter. David Lean is one of the most celebrated British directors. However, long before he went to Hollywood to make giant epics like Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Zhivago, he made low-key adaptations of famous British stories and plays. Brief Encounter is certainly one of the finest pieces of romantic cinema ever produced. It's a relatively simple story about two strangers who meet and fall in love, except they are already married. The film tastefully shows them dealing with this predicament, and the attachment that grows between them. If anything, the censorship restrictions at the time helped the film, as Lean uses body language and dialogue, rather than sex, to show their forbidden love for each other. There's a beautiful atmosphere to the film, and the smart script also means we find ourselves wondering the same conundrum as the characters. Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard have excellent chemistry, so there's an odd rooting interest for them to get together. This remains one of the great romantic films, because the solution is not so easy, and that makes Brief Encounter one of the essential British classics. Wallace and Gromit in The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Nick Park's lovable duo already had plenty of success in shorts, and he brought the same dedication in transferring their adventures to a feature-length format. The screenplay remained witty, and the claymation animation is the usual splendid work we have come to expect from Aardman. Park also nicely expanded the community Wallace and Gromit reside in with a wonderful set of new characters, including a slightly deranged priest and a hunter with a taste for rabbit blood. What makes Curse of the Were-Rabbit extra special is how Park treats it like a genuine Hammer horror film, taking full advantage of the camera and creating some genuinely atmospheric scenes. The chemistry between Wallace and Gromit is note perfect, and the film nicely explores the bond between them, as Wallace is affected by a science experiment gone wrong. The set pieces are incredibly directed, and the humor never stops being funny and charming. This is an animated film I keep coming back to often. As Wallace would always say, cracking cheese, Gromit. Goldfinger. For 55 years, the James Bond films have had their ups and downs, but there are nonetheless debates over which is the best film. While I rank On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Dr. No highly, Goldfinger remains the gold standard of the series for me. No pun intended. It might be the point in the 007 franchise when everything just clicks together. Sean Connery remains my favorite Bond, and he brings the proper swagger, charm, and ruthlessness in Goldfinger, as he goes toe-to-toe with one of his best villains. There's the right level of goofiness, but also some strong stakes, with one memorable set piece after another. Who can forget Bond with a deadly laser inching closer towards him? Or the golf game with Oddjob showing his mighty hat powers? Or the climax at Fort Knox? Throw in the famous theme song sung by Shirley Bassey and those brilliant car chases, and I feel no film so perfectly defines the appeal of Bond more than Goldfinger. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. A frequently hilarious send-up of the Arthurian legend, this is sort of comedy where its delights are pretty much self-explanatory. Despite its slightly sketch-like nature, each scene managed to produce the required laughs, and through it all, the Python team still managed to craft a solid story about King Arthur and his knights searching for the Holy Grail. The comedy never feels repetitive, but the script jumps between conversations about whether coconuts can migrate to a stubborn knight who keeps getting his limbs chopped off. Terry Gilliam's animated portions add further to the enjoyment, as does the instantly catchy Knights of the Round Table musical number. I already went into plenty of detail in my Monty Python tribute, but needless to say, Monty Python and the Holy Grail deserves its spot as one of the quintessential British comedies. Chicken Run. If you ever wondered what I think is the smartest screenplay ever written for an animated feature, I would say Chicken Run. Aardman's first feature film, this film cleverly takes the Great Escape concept and applies it to chickens marvelously. The jokes are incredibly witty and layered, and the attention to detail Peter Lord and Nick Park brought to the sets is incredible. This feels like a genuine chicken coop, but with the added terror of feeling like a prisoner of war camp. Harry Gregson Williams and John Powell's marvelous score only adds to the appropriate feeling as the chickens plot and hatch their plan. There are genuine stakes and a ticking clock, and Mrs. Tweedy might be one of the most underrated animated villains. The sharp British wit was kept intact, even with the help of DreamWorks and Mel Gibson lending a voice. The talented animators at Aardman did a fantastic job bringing their craft to a longer format. This definitely ranks among my favorite animated films and one of the most rewatchable. Billy Elliot. The film debut of director Stephen Daldry and lead actor Jamie Bell, this manages to tell a touching story of a young British lad wanting to take up ballet, while setting it within the historical context of the coal miners' strike of 1984. The script manages to tackle the subject of gender stereotypes in a way that shows the difficulties and expectations that can come from that, as Billy navigates pursuing his own dream and wanting to help his family through this. Bell gives an excellent performance, and Julie Walters also deserves acclaim for a role as his teacher, trying to figure out how to harness Billy's talent. Daldry's direction and Lee Hall's screenplay match to make the film sentimental, but not overtly schmaltzy. For me, Billy Elliot hits the right spot in how to do a feel-good film right. It's a genuinely heartwarming picture, and it's hard not to smile at multiple points. Sense and Sensibility. There have been many Jane Austen film adaptations, but this is the one with which all of them are compared to. Emma Thompson's excellent screenplay is the reason I think she should be given the reins of any adaptation, but Ang Lee also deserves credit for his beautiful direction. Lee was seen as an unusual choice to tackle Jane Austen, but he really knew how to balance the character dynamics on screen for this lovely tale. The dialogue is sharp and humorous, but the film also more than handles the relationships. Every single actor gives a fantastic performance, with Thompson leading the way as Eleanor Dashwood, Kate Winslet properly portraying the romance-obsessed Marianne, and Hugh Grant and Alan Rickman each playing the different ideal man. Ang Lee somehow manages to make scenes of even just the characters conversing and doing the activities compelling. At first glance, most might dismiss this as a frothy romance, but Thompson and Lee are able to respect Austen's text while modernizing it so as to fit modern ideas of romance. Sensibility really is one of the best cinematic romances. But my favorite British film is Monty Python's The Life of Brian. I mentioned in my Monty Python tribute how I consider this one of the greatest satires ever put to screen, and as such, I also consider it the finest British film to make it to cinemas, even as there were calls for bans. This is the sort of satire where it's aged superbly well, as the Pythons were really ahead of their time. The confrontations between the multiple fringe groups present in the film was meant to mock similar groups that formed in Britain at the time, and that has somehow become relevant again. Through it all is the story of Brian, who is mistaken for the Messiah and finds himself dealing with a bunch of people who cannot think for themselves. Every joke lands, no matter how many times I watch it. And while a knowledge of the time period makes it funnier, it's not a requirement for enjoying Life of Brian. Featuring the most unexpected movie ending of all time, Life of Brian is a smart and multi-layered piece of comedy featuring the Pythons at the height of their powers. And it's an excellent piece of filmmaking, as Terry Jones treats it like a genuine real film and not just a comedy. It's fitting Life of Brian is my #1 British film, because I feel it is the epitome of the British sensibility, with its intelligent wit, sharp insight, lack of fear for making fun of anyone, and just all around a jolly good time. But tell me, what are some of your favorite British films? I'd love to know, and I'll see you next time.